honored to be here. I was very honored to be asked to judge the Grace Paley Prize, partly because of my respect for the AWP organization, partly because of my reverence for Grace Paley, for whom the prize is named, and also because there's been so many great winners in the short story category over the years, all the way back to one of my favorite books, Wanting Only to Be Heard by Jack Driscoll. That's a real oldie but a goodie that won this prize ages ago. There were so many fine story collections in the pool that I judged from my screeners that I could have literally made a case for 20 of them, 20 of the 30 finalists that I saw that were forwarded to me from my screeners. But one book stood out early and never left my mind during the entire reading process. It is Bewildered by Carla Panciera. I can start by mentioning the collection's range in style, in subject matter, narrative stance, and structure. More important than the range itself is the level of excellence with which the author navigates so many different kinds of territories. There are stories in first person, second person, and third person. There are stories that focus on the canted realities of childhood, the accumulating losses of middle age, and even old age. The writing is always economical without ever being minimal. Each sentence is truly made, full of suggestion, layered in understory. Attention is paid not only to meaning on every level, but also to rhythm, to cadence. Here is a prose writer who, among many other things, cares about the sounds of words. I found out after I found out Carla's name that she's also a poet, and it shows in her fiction. But contests are one, I found out, not broadly but specifically, in stories and scenes that I kept going back to with the excuse of comparing them to other excellent manuscripts, but truly just for the pleasure of reading them again. There were many such moments in the manuscript, but the moment that won the Grace Paley Prize for Bewildered is in the title story, is in fact the moment the collection's title shows up in the text and gives the reader that extra jolt of pleasure for it. I don't know if you can write a funnier, more poignant, more layered, harder working scene than the one that ends with the word bewildered. It is a scene that the great Grace Paley herself, I believe, would have loved. Please welcome Carla Panciera.
Thank you, Pam, for that intro and for plucking my book out of that pile. I never forget it. Supriya, thank you for one of the most exciting phone calls I've ever received in my life. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Rebecca and Sebastian, for making the trip with me. Thank you to the University of Massachusetts Press for doing an amazing job with my book and for just being really wonderful people to work with. And thank you to AWP for sponsoring the prize and for gathering many wonderful writers and people who care about writing and reading together. Good? Okay. So I'm not going to read that scene. I wish now they had it marked out, but I read a book. I'm going to read from the first story in the book. It's a story called All of a Sudden, and it is about the friendship between two young girls. The narrator and then another friend of hers, somebody that she meets, brand new friend, who's a bit quirky, somebody that she really doesn't have a lot of experience knowing someone like this, and I'm going to just pick it up pretty soon after she meets her, the first time she comes to her house. Albina walked into my house that first day the way she always entered places, as if everyone had been talking about her, but she wasn't about to be angry. She was close to apologizing for the interruption, her smile a great attempt at smiling, a hopeful smile, with more faith than you might imagine she'd have. She flicked her hair back over one shoulder and stuck her head forward as if peering over a threshold. My mother turned away from the television on the counter. My father paused over his bowl of soup. "Nice to meet you," Albina said. before anybody had been introduced. She touched my father's shoulder, offered her pale hand to my mother, not as a handshake, just to clasp fingers the way I'd seen adults say goodbye on their way out of crowded places. "We're glad you're here," my father said, which he'd never said to anyone before. My mother kept her hand for a little while. Later my mother said, "She's lovely," which I hadn't noticed. Albina inspired that kind of surprise. I remembered the place she lived. Wood floors worn white, beds unadorned but for white sheets, dark blankets folded at the foot, closets full of empty hangers clicking together, her big white shirt when we didn't wear things like that, her shoes and those of her sisters aligned, the corners of the trundle she shared with one of the girls folded neatly as a gift. "I'm named for a saint," she said, "not a famous one." I looked it up. "It's spelled wrong," I told her. The Blessed Virgin, the kind you see in cemeteries, kept watch on a table in the front entrance, her bowed neck strung with scapula. 6 children, and never a stray teaspoon in the sink. The phone off the hook for days because of her mother's headaches, because one of the girls got caught smoking. Figurines everywhere that her mother paid a quarter for at yard sales. Her father cut recesses in walls for them, like a gift shop museum, a kitschy display. On Saturday mornings before we met to walk downtown, Albina had no bike to ride. Her mother made her dust them. The kitchen table would be filled with women in pink skirts, their hair piled like ice cream, and the men in long coats, tails frozen into black fins, everyone ready for the ball. No cracks about their necks, no missing hands, despite the bird bone narrow shape of them. Albina wiped porcelain faces with an old sock, setting them back as gently as eggs into that empty house. "My mother wants everyone out," she'd say. I'd wait on a rock across the street. I went to parties she was not invited to. She was the new girl. She still printed her name. These were reasons enough for exclusion. Albina did not feel sorry for herself the way I felt sorry for her. It was as if she had no expectations of her own. Besides, she gave terrible gifts. Panda-bear keychains, a felt bag of shiny blue stones. So I went and acted like a popular girl. I had a danskin suit for pool parties. I knew tricks for making people talk in their sleep. I imagined Albina trolling the aisles of the dime store, the sleeves on a denim jacket of her brother's rolled up over her wrists. The saleswomen, older than our mothers, sweaters cape-like around hunched shoulders, would follow after her, expecting her to pocket lip gloss or musk, things she fingered or picked up to smell. There was nothing she thought of stealing, but who else would have known that about her? I stopped going places without her. I felt a generous love for her and for myself for loving her. When she couldn't go somewhere because she was ironing curtains, she'd been out that day already, she had to get lettuce at the store, I stayed home, my mother asking, "Where's Albina today?" We'd found a rusting truck cap in a back field and dragged an old coffee table into it. She brought a candle, and once we tried cigarettes. Days without her, I'd sit there by myself, bring the dog, find something to use as a vase, and fill it with wild chamomile. "You could ask another friend over," my mother said, but I had no wish to do that. Albina used words wrong, words no one else would get wrong, words that made other girls study her to see if she was serious. I stood amongst them, awkward for Albina, who remained unfazed, who tilted her head at their stares and waited to be let in on something. So when we were alone, as we were summer days, we'd walk, and she'd say, "Wouldn't it be great to go to the beach somewhere, stop walking around the street like vagabonds?" "Vagabonds," I'd tell her. She'd shrug, not angry, not embarrassed. What's the difference? I'd feel my own impatience. If only you'd get this right, I think. She'd say, "I'm not perfect." In the silence of the heat, we'd resume our tread, me toting a stone of regret. Then Albina would hang her body, thin as fishing line, over the curb and wave at the empty street. All of a sudden, gorgeous guys drive by. "Hey girls, surf's up," she said, and our awkwardness ended. All of a sudden, she liked to say that. She could never be depended upon to sleep over or to go shopping, to do anything else we did. Her mother found her at birthday parties and banged on the windows to demand her home. You couldn't get your heart set on the drive-in on Friday night or the baseball game after school. Even on Saturdays, when her mother and father went dancing, they insisted she stay in. Her sisters out, her brother too. The youngest child, also a boy, asleep on sheets Albina shook out the window each day. She made sure the television cooled down before they came home so they wouldn't know she'd been watching. Her parents slept in the next morning, sending their thin envelope to Mass with Albina. Many times they asked her about the sermon and called the rectory to make sure she was right. She didn't ask for reasons. She did not fight back. One afternoon in his garage, her father's best friend, she called him Uncle, put his hand on her knee. A sunburned knee, a tender, warm knee. He said things that made her want to cry, but she pretended it was a joke and hurried out past a workbench strewn with tools. She was 14. She never told anyone what he did. She told me, fingers playing the tabletop like a piano, the old gold cat on the grapevine outside the window, studying her like a fish, like something dazzling and vulnerable beneath the light, the pale flesh of her, the way she flipped her thick hair from one peeling shoulder to the next. She laughed through it, trying to make me laugh, as if he too had been kidding, as if everyone understood the fun of it. All of a sudden, Batman and his little co-host Robin come in for a screwdriver, and I'm out of there, she said. She hurried through the story so she wouldn't be late for dinner. You could live here, I said. My parents wouldn't mind. She pasted on a little smile. Why would I want to do that, she said. When her parents urged her to visit her uncle more often, she refused. They kept her home for a week varnishing their bedroom floor, but she wouldn't change her mind. That winter, she found an old purple sweater, mohair, in my attic. Keep it, I said, when she tried it on. She wore it our first year in high school. Wore it when we didn't wear old things. Wore it on days too warm to wear it. Wore it on days when she didn't wear her big white shirt with the pink bra beneath it. A made-up pink, a pink that didn't appear anywhere else in the world. The artist's daughters, the builder's daughter, stared at her back and then at each other. She walked up to their lunch table one day. I'd like to sit down, she said, her smile full of those baby teeth, if I'm not taking someone's seat. Surprised, they nodded towards an empty chair. I set my tray down next to hers, pulled another seat over. I felt too close to her, but I didn't know where else to sit. I didn't want to leave her there. Albina ate her cake first, a flake of white frosting clinging to her lip. She glanced around the silent faces peering into brown bags or picking at the hot stew in the trays before them. She beamed, as if she were watching children she adored being absorbed in constructing block towers. You're in my algebra class, she said to a girl shoving orange peels into her sack. The bell sounded for the end of lunch. All of a sudden, we think of something to talk about, and bam, it's time to go, Albina said. Thank you.